I'm excited that you all could join us tonight. So Code for America, in case you're not familiar with our work, we are a technology nonprofit. We work with governments to try and improve government service delivery using technology. So we do things like help people access food assistance. We have some work in the criminal justice space, helping basically clear people's records when they are eligible for that. So we've been doing work recently, for example, with the San Francisco District Attorney and other people around the state to proactively clear marijuana convictions off of people's records in the wake of Prop 64. So anyway, we believe that there's a huge potential of technology to make people's lives better, and that working with government is a great way to do that. And so that's a little bit about our work. I'm really excited to host this panel tonight because Code for America actually started our own apprenticeship program two years ago. Well, we're in the second year of doing it. So we had 3 apprentices who joined us last year, and we have 2 this year. And it's been a really successful program. We're just so thrilled with the apprentices that we've been able to work with. All 3 of our apprentices from last year, we ended up hiring as full-time employees. They've been amazing. And this year we actually are doing something new. We're partnering with this TechSF to basically make our apprenticeship a little bit more formalized and actually registered with the Department of Labor. So we've added a little bit more structure to our program, and we're excited to sort of see how that goes this year. I'm sure that Orion, one of our panelists, will tell you more about that opportunity that you could also do at your companies. Anyway, so the apprenticeship has been just a wonderful thing for us at Code for America, and so I'm excited for you all to hear more about apprenticeships tonight.
Thanks, Laura. So we're really excited to explore this topic. Before we get our panelists up here, really quickly, how familiar is everybody with the TechEquity Collaborative? Raise your hand if you've been to one of our events or on our mailing list. So a few of you. Cool. So for those of you that are brand new to TechEquity, we're a nonprofit that was started a couple of years ago with the mission to really activate tech workers in the Bay Area to be more civically active. We saw a lot of the reaction, particularly when Uber announced they were moving into Oakland, and also the reaction from the election in 2016. And we saw more tech workers taking to the streets than ever before, but there isn't really a formal organizing source for them. And so we see that tech workers have a ton of civic power that goes untapped, and we wanted to create a space to organize that power. We focus a lot on affordable housing. That's where our work has started. We have been sponsoring some legislation this year at the state level, working on some campaigns locally. Beyond the Box in Oakland is one that we're working on right now. And we're starting to move into this world of workforce and labor, which is why we're really excited to talk about apprenticeships tonight. So we have a great set of panelists. Also, I want to point out we have a code of conduct. Basically, this says, don't be a jerk. This is a space for learning. It's a space for conversation. It's a space that you can also disagree, but disagree respectfully. So with that being said, I want to bring up our panelists. Tonight, Lily is going to be moderating. Our moderator, Kirsten, had to step out for a family emergency. But Lily, who also works at the K4 Center, is going to do a great job, and she's going to introduce the rest of our panelists.
Thank you. First of all, clap to you all, because you must be hella dedicated to this work to be here on a Warriors game night, right? We might actually check on the score a little bit here and there, just as an FYI. But I'm super excited to be here. My name is Lily Genghis. I'm the Chief Tech Community Officer at the K4 Center, which all of our work is focused on getting more folks of color specifically into tech and tech entrepreneurship as well. And so we take a look at it as an ecosystem, and we're looking at what are some of the barriers, the systemic barriers that we have seen pre-K through 12, post-secondary workplace, and then eventually entrepreneurship as well as investment side. And so all of the work is really intertwined, and we're looking to not put band-aids on the systems that we know are biased and broken, but creating new ones. And today is a special topic, specifically on what are some of those new models, right? And so apprenticeships are super important. And so I'll just give a little bit of background. First of all, here, how many of you are familiar with what apprenticeships are? It's kind of the return back to the OG ways, when we were like in World War I and World War II. That's how actually we got a lot of the workforce trained up to mobilize in large numbers. And that model is actually really interesting to see how we can actually create more talent on a larger scale that is not your traditional 4-year university. As an engineer myself, I know I went through the journey of what it's like to get your engineering degree, software engineer for 4 years and then go into the workplace. The reality is that technology is moving so fast, and the needs that we are creating because of all these global businesses are not going to wait for that. And so what is this new model that's applied for us? What would it look like? And so, like I mentioned, it's a little bit focused on non-traditional backgrounds, bootcamps, grads, community college students, self-taught, a lot of career transitioners. How many of you yourselves find yourself in that spot? All right. Well, you're already in tech, so great to know. It's usually over 6 months, and the goal for this is to convert into a full-time job. And so it's a great way to test both sides, test the relationship, and test really if this is the work that you want to be doing, both as the talent as well as the industry. And also it's a great way to start making some money. Our work, I'm based out in Oakland, and as you've seen in San Francisco as well as Oakland, the level of gentrification, the disparity of wage, specifically when you start taking a look at by race, it's very, very obvious. And so that's one of the things that we also want to make sure that we are very intentional about. So with that said, what is all this stuff about? How does it actually work? Who's involved? And so today we're going to do a little bit of a mini TED Talk. So we're going to take a look at from the talent perspective, because we want to make sure that technology is a tool, but it comes back to people. So we'll have Manisha from GitHub, so you can join us. Please give her a welcome. Shalee from LinkedIn will be sharing the industry side. We'll be sharing from the tech SF as well as public sector side. We'll spend a little bit more for the public sector for all the folks that are here, right?
Yeah.
And then last but not least, Annalise is going to be sharing what other models outside of the US are doing, and also tying it back to what we can do here as policy from the state side. So let's give it all up for all of them. So in that end, what we'll do is we'll like you all to introduce yourself, what your role is, and also to go a little bit off script, why is this work important for you, just so that way folks can understand your why. So we'll start with you.
Sure. So my name's Annalise, and I work as a senior associate at Social Policy Research Associate and Associates, plural. And we are a research and evaluation and technical assistance consulting firm based in Oakland. Historically, we've done a lot of work with the federal government, so we really specialize in national programs, but more and more we're doing work at the state and local level. And I'm personally working on a project with Orion and some others at San Francisco on a regional effort that just started to create a regional apprenticeship system for tech. So that's one project. I'm also working with the Unity Council in Oakland on access for immigrant workers into construction and building trades in the unionized role. And I'm working a lot with my colleague Vince Kohler, who wrote a report called Closing the Gap about the future of apprenticeship in California. And that is really to lay out a vision for how this could look at the state level. And I helped him with that report. He's getting vacation in Switzerland right now. So that's where some of the broader stuff comes in, and like kind of helping him in those efforts to raise this up to the state level. Oh, and why is it important to me? Well, I personally come from a working class background, and through many cartwheels and backflips, I managed to get into college and grad school, and with lots of debt also. And I'm afraid that now the college prices are so much higher than when I was younger that these opportunities aren't going to be open to people like me and many others who are even less privileged than myself. So I feel personally very attached to the idea of making sure that there's access to economic opportunity, especially as inequality increases. So that's my personal passion.
Great. My name is Orion Willis. I work for San Francisco's Office of Economic and Workforce Development on a small but mighty team called TechSF. We operate a mayoral initiative to fund local tech training providers, mostly nonprofits, to upskill people in different tech disciplines with the goal of preparing them for job and career opportunities. The initiative is about 7 years old. In that time, we've placed more than 2,500 people into paid internships or jobs, and we've had a lot of success in that short time, but we still see a segment of our job seekers not being job offered at the end of training, and we really see apprenticeship as the on-ramp that will get their foot in the door. So that's what I work on currently. It's an exciting time for apprenticeship because I really feel like we've got some momentum right now. And I think personally why I'm vested in this work is similarly, I'm a first generation college graduate from like a low opportunity kind of neighborhood or community, and really grew up seeing a lot of talent around me, but not a ton of opportunity, and I think apprenticeship kind of casts a wider net to capture some of my friends, so that's why I'm here.
Hi everyone, I'm Manisha Priyadarshini, and I was part of GitHub's first pilot of their Apprenticeship, and recently became a full-time hire, and within sales development, and I have a great team who's kind of helping me get to a path towards solution engineering as well. While in my time there, as soon as I became full-time, I started this thing called SDR meetups, where we're trying to include as many folks in the Bay Area who might be working at like certain startups or companies, but personally for me, more people from like the East Bay, people that I grew up with, who can start getting closer to that network and those opportunities, which really kind of leads into why this is really important to me. My parents went from Nepal to India, were considered kind of, less than in that country, came to this country, kind of faced those same challenges again. And at this point, I truly believe like all of these are put in our place to make us stronger, and that when we do get the opportunity to share a narrative that contributes to making this world just a little bit more wholesome.
To follow. Well, I'm Shalini Agarwal. I'm part of LinkedIn Eng team, and the reason I'm here is we have an apprenticeship program that we grew from ground up almost 3 years ago when we started on that journey, and it's all about how do we have people from non-traditional backgrounds, whether it is people that didn't go to four-year degree college or did go to four-year degree college, people that went to boot camps but had to leave the workforce, or people that are veterans that want to get back in the workforce. How do we have a program where they can have a soft landing, where they can have the mentorship and coaching to grow their career and move forward from there? So that's why we put together this program called REACH at LinkedIn, and it's a bottoms-up program with a top-down mandate on it as well. So we'll talk more details on it, but really amazing results and amazing energy across the company for the program, and really thankful for people that come through that program as well. So, and for personally, I'm actually touched by all the stories that I hear across this panel, across the room, across the apprentices, and it just brings that energy for me to help out more, both from an equality, from an economic opportunity perspective, and just changing the lives. Tech world is so ubiquitous today. You don't have to just look for people that go through the four-year degree. A while ago, that was really needed when we didn't have a lot of these other venues to learn and grow. With all the different available material, training, courses, online, offline, people can learn and grow with the right motivation and energy and passion, and that's what we really need to make use of and build those people's confidence and provide those opportunities.
Well, that's the end of the panel because you got all the insights now.
Yeah.
But to move on, like I mentioned earlier, looking at starting with people, right? And so we wanted to start with Manisha, and if you can share your story of how we got to know you through TechHire Oakland, and just to give a little context of what TechHire Oakland is, that's one of the key presenter initiatives that Kirsten leads that is really focused on getting folks in the East Bay specifically their first job in tech, but also helping them continue to advancements within in the industry, and eventually, with connecting it to other resources across the journey. And what we saw when we did a survey about 2 years ago, one of the things that we kept seeing is, great, there's a lot of awareness programs taking place in City of Oakland. But when we looked at the data, there was 0 programs directed to community college students, 18 plus in general, to be honest. And so if you're really trying to get more folks that are age ready, work age ready, why aren't we tackling and providing more services and investing in that area? We also saw that when we did a survey with about 16 of the big tech companies, where they were putting their dollars, it was the same thing. A lot of money was going towards elementary, middle schools, and high schools, with 0 going into community colleges. And so one of the things that we did was taking a look at some of the data is explore what is happening. Who is driving what side of the strategy? In reality, there is no strategy, let's be real. Because when we started to take a look at where some of these companies, who was funding and where they were not, which group and why, it was really all over. And so I think the apprenticeships is really an opportunity for organizations to be much more strategic, have a much more impactful and defined manner to measure their impact. And so TechHire Oakland's shifted to provide more awareness and create more pathways and connect opportunities more directly to that 18 plus East Bay talent that wasn't being served. And so that's how we got to know Manisha. Manisha was actually at our first event that we had at GitHub. So if you want to share a little bit of your story, how you got there,
Yeah.
and then once you got the apprenticeship, how was it structured so that way folks can learn about your experience?
Yeah, definitely. I can provide some insight there. We'll try to go back, but not like too long because we, only have a certain amount of time here. But yeah, to keep a long story pretty short, I found myself kind of faced with wanting an education, but not necessarily having the means for it, and obligations where, I couldn't put myself first. My siblings came first, making sure that they kind of had their basics. So I went to community college. Then I transferred to a university, to UCI, for computer science and engineering. Was kind of ill-prepared for kind of the budget it takes to get a 4-year degree, even though I was only doing 2 of them there. At a point, I found myself working 3 jobs, trying to take my 4 classes, trying to do my extracurriculars, those unpaid internships that look good on your resume, but they don't really feed you. Except while you're on campus. But it made me feel like I couldn't handle it. And I felt like, my motto is to always lead with my heart and listen to the universe. And in my heart at that moment, I was like, I need to make sure these kids are all right. I don't think I can do both. And if it's meant to happen, it will. Ended up starting working, taking these skills and doing kind of odd full stack jobs for like smaller companies. And at some point, I was still in LA at this point. Around the eclipse, I decided things had to change. I don't know why. Again, it was a calling. I ended up coming here, not having a place to stay, knew that I was going to stay at my friend's garage, I was going to Uber, whatever it took. And my friend handed me the flyer, actually, for the GitHub workshop. And GitHub was always a part of my life, and it was the way that I felt like I could be a coder. Like there was a community that would accept me without a degree, without papers, without a resume. And so when I saw that, I was like, okay, this needs to happen. And with the great, awesome support from Lily and Kirsten, they geared me up, and I got to tell GitHub my story, and I guess they liked me. And I had an amazing journey with a manager who was pretty new, and so we actually structured the apprenticeship together. And I thought that was really valuable because she had fresh eyes, I had fresh eyes, we had mutual passions, and we have really similar work ethics. So it ended up working really great. We used issues, repositories to track different projects that I wanted to do, and she's really given me so much space to grow and forge my own path. So I think it was pretty fluid, but I think it was meant to be.
Can you describe a little bit of because it was a 6-month, and then were there any specific modules or themes that you went along?
So it was very, I would say, a almost agile way of how we were moving. We would try out things for a couple weeks. I would give feedback. Like, before we would do the projects, we would discuss like KPIs. And since we were using issues and project boards, everything was really well documented. So like moving forward, we can replicate that as well.
Great. And also learning about your experience, looking back, what would you tell, not just GitHub, but in general, some of the companies of, how can they make their onboarding also inclusive and making sure that it's reflective of, the environment that they're trying to create?
I think that's an excellent question. I do consider myself privileged in the sense that a lot of folks that are coming to apprenticeships may not have the same technical background that I do. And keeping those in mind, we've actually created awesome modules that are like intro, like beginning, like videos, as well as worksheets to really get people to feel like we can break down the jargon that surrounds this space. So like the other day, package registry was just launched. So we were talking about packages and breaking it down like, hey, it's kind of like how in a recipe you have your kind of main source, so like you have a bag of flour, but in your actual recipe, you're only going to use about a cup, which is similar in like a package is a bag of flour and you're only going to use a cup, aka some of the methodologies in there, maybe some of the class definitions. But yeah, just things like that so that we're really approaching tech in a very accessible way, even within the company.
Thank you. Now moving on to the industry side. And actually, LinkedIn was one of our also partner companies when we were first launching these specific workshops aimed at connecting the local talent to apprenticeships. LinkedIn came in, and it was actually really great because one of the validated the demand, but also validated the talent that exists. All of the 4 workshops that we had 100% placement, at least one person in some of these national programs. So it's really great to be able to say that at least 25% of the talent is represented by East Bay talent, and talent of color, which is also really important, and also talent of different socioeconomic status and different educational status that was showing that the talent is there if they're also able to get connected to community, to employers who also get it, which takes us back to LinkedIn, especially with LinkedIn. It's been around, I think it's one of the ones that's been around a little bit the longest, but if you can share a little bit more about the vision and how, what departments were really important or were critical to make this happen, and then what's the actual structure, so that way folks can learn.
So let me start with the vision side of things. So when we started the program, we wanted to do something. We actually had no clue. 3.5 years ago, there was nothing. Like right now, you mentioned, Orion, that there's a movement around apprenticeship. We have these workshops or we have these panels. 4 years ago, nothing was there. So when we started, we looked around and there was nothing really to say, oh, this is working, so we should do this. So we basically started with the vision, oh, there needs to be something. And our vision was to really create, the LinkedIn vision is economic opportunity for every member of the global workforce. Taking our LinkedIn's vision, how do we make sure that that opportunity is available for actually every member of the global workforce? And that workforce, like I mentioned earlier, is not just from the 4-year degree college. And if you look at the news headlines every so often, it's like, we need more tech workers. Well, yes, there's so many of them that are learning on their own, going to bootcamps or community colleges. How do you tap into them? Most of our hiring pipelines, whether it is recruiting or talent acquisition, don't look at those people. We get resumes and they don't even get screened or they don't even move to the next level. So how do you provide that opportunity of getting into the funnel to make that opportunity available? So that's why we put that program together. We kind of iterated, as Manisha was saying, she did it with her own program. We kind of did it with the program. We started with something as a notion to say, we need to change how do we interview folks. Because the regular whiteboarding tech interview that most companies have is not the way to hire the people from the non-traditional background. So we have to really think about, like, how do we find these people that have the passion, the grit, and will go that extra mile to make things work and actually have a desire to learn. Because it's not just about having the passion, but you need to showcase that you are trying to learn, an ability to self-motivate yourself to do it. Because we can bring the horse to the water, but we cannot help you drink it if you don't have that desire. So we really looked at how do we create that different way of getting the information from the person. So we put together this, instead of doing a telephone phone screen that usually a company does, we created a more like an essay approach like you do for a college application, where you tell us what you have done in the past, because your past kind of reflects what you'll do in the future too. Like Manisha's story is a perfect example for somebody who really went extra mile to get stuff done. And those are the people we are looking for, like people that have the desire but don't have the means to always go all the way through. So we did that application process. We looked for some technical baseline because we are not an education institution. So we need some baseline for people to, as they come in the door, to handhold them to move forward. And then on interview process, as they came on site, instead of doing whiteboarding, we gave them take-home assignment to work on their own time. We gave about a week's time worth of time. And when they came on site, they had to explain what they have done so that we can really see what they understand and what they don't. Give them some extensions to apply and do coding on site and have a conversation. If people didn't even get selected as part of that process, our hope was that they learned something and took back something with them. So that's how the program, from an intake perspective or the opportunity funnel perspective, was created. And then it was the experience side of the things, where I want to make sure there's enough guidance and education for the people that are going to be actually nurturing them for their journey into software and engineering. Really making sure you need to change, to Manisha's point, is like making sure the language that we use is not just the tech jargon, but really simplifying it in a way where you are able to understand the candidate and are able to make them part of your team, be more inclusive around how you talk about it, how you measure the performance, and how do you make sure there's a step-by-step journey. You need to crawl and walk before you run.
Definitely. What were some of the expected but also the unexpected outcomes that you've been able to see through some of the different cohorts?
Interestingly, there are expected outcomes from an apprentice side of these things, people who came on board, but there were also outcomes from the people that were involved as part of whether it was the hiring journey or the experience journey as well. So from the apprentice side of the world, there was definitely a lot of learnings in terms of as they came in. What we found is, because our application or the people coming in were coming from different backgrounds, what we found is like not everybody is the same cookie cutter. When you have a person coming in as a 4-year degree college, there's certain basics that you expect everybody to know as an intern. But when they come as an apprentice, because they all had their own journey, their own path to learn, they come with different tech baselines. And you have to really organize the work that you give them, the guidance that you give them, tailoring it to the person that is coming in. So we really had to make sure we are having that lens as we put together the iterations of the program. Also, as they continued the journey, we also learned like putting a time-bound restrictions on it is actually not healthy, because they come from different tech baselines. They also have a different way of learning and speed of learning sometimes, because for some people it takes a longer time to understand certain things, and then they're off running faster, and some people have a more constant pace to do that. And we need to make sure we are not putting extra stress when they're already very fearful about what will happen next, because okay, great, I got the apprenticeship, what next? I need to get the job.
Yeah.
So they're in a constant pressure during that apprenticeship. Like, this is a 6 months long or 9 months long job interview to a certain extent. So removing that artificial restriction to a certain extent also helped to alleviate some of those unwanted pressures.
Great. And special thank you to LinkedIn, because one of our talent that was placed, you all were very flexible, very hands-on. There were some visa issues, which I and also one of the things that's super important, especially from the industry side with apprenticeships, when we take a look at how game-changing it could be for somebody's experience, we're having folks who are avoiding the, we should do more of this. How can we get this at scale? And how can, if there's a tech company that's interested in doing this, how can they get started? What's the process?
Sure. So I think, I mean, there's a number of ways that you can start. I mean, there's templates online. I mean, you know, my role at the City of San Francisco and a grantee of the U.S. Department of Labor as an intermediary for registered apprenticeship is to kind of work with anyone interested in the model to determine whether or not it's a fit for your company at this moment, and if not, like when it is. So most companies at some point in the growth cycle would really benefit from apprenticeship, and it's just a matter of distinguishing when. I think that having the LinkedIn Reach program is really adding to the momentum. You guys are really a trailblazer in this space, and I think developing a proof of concept that will make my job a lot easier, because the data that comes from your program that really lends to, hey, by using this lever or this model, you can upskill and onboard and retain non-traditional pathway job seekers, is going to go a long way. It's going to help companies become more innovative and ultimately make more money. So there's a number of different ways to get started. I think the easiest way, plug to my team, is just contact us. I mean, our services are free. We'll work with you, look over any job descriptions, and then we can kind of work those into a certain set of guidelines that the Department of Labor has developed for us to see if it's a good fit or not. But that's generally where we start.
So let's say somebody from here is like, yes, I'm in, this panel is amazing, I want to create apprenticeships. They'll contact you, and you'll start the discussion. But what are some of the common obstacles that you maybe have seen or challenges, just to give folks a heads up?
Yeah, I think, again, there's not a ton of data, right? So I think we all operate in a super hyper competitive space right now around talent. And culturally, we're risk averse in our hiring, and companies are constantly competing for talent, right? So we are all going to the same pipelines and offering, highly paid internships, and offering, we're trying to buy talent. What apprenticeship allows companies to do is it allows you to develop talent. So moving from being a consumer to a producer of talent. And I think once we have that proof of concept that says, hey, apprenticeship will complement your university recruiting efforts or your internship efforts, that there'll be a cultural shift there. But right now, it's hard to pitch it, right? Like, I have no problem going to a company and saying, hey, you should do internships, because they're already doing it. But I think as we see, the LinkedIn Reaches, the Code for America engineering program, and after we scale that and get some more occupations in there, all of that data will really, it'll sell the model, and ultimately I won't have to be here talking about it anymore.
So going to Annalise, so taking this not just at a state level, but also at a national level, but now let's actually take it at a global level. What can the U.S. be learning from other countries? Because we know that other countries have actually been employing this model at different rates and at scale. So what could the U.S. learn from some of the different models? And maybe you can describe a specific model that you may be aware of.
Yeah, sure. I'm most familiar with the Swiss model, which is one of the best ones in terms of the evidence. So I'll start there. So one of the myths I want to dispel first is that Switzerland is just so different from us that we can't possibly borrow anything from them. So a lot of people have a misconception that Switzerland is just like completely homogenous and all white, and it's actually a quarter of Switzerland is foreign-born immigrants. And so a lot of those immigrants also go through their employment and training vocational system. And secondly, it's a very capitalist country, and as you might know, all the foreign banks are there and such, right? So people might often think it's Sweden or something, but it's actually pretty similar culturally in that sense, market-driven kind of orientation culturally. Not to say there aren't differences, but I just didn't want people to think like, what can we really learn from Switzerland? We can't ever do that here. But anyway, so I want to go through a couple of cultural mindset shifts that I think have to happen. So the first is to move from stigma to status. So in the U.S., a vocational pathway has been divested for 30 years. We've basically said, well, if you don't want to go to college, first we said, well, go to the trades and do this vocational program, and there's no route back to college. And it's like, you do this or you do this. And it was very racialized, and like very class oriented. And so you either tracked this way or tracked that way. And I think in Switzerland, they've worked very hard to make it a path to college. And in fact, what she said is a paid path to college. So let's say you're in high school, you do it, let's say Google, you do your apprenticeship at Google, you do part of your time on the job there and part of your time in school, you get your high school diploma, and afterwards you apply to college and you say, I worked at Google. And that's the idea. And so moving it from, and some of these, in Switzerland, some of these apprenticeships are more competitive to get into than Harvard. So how do you kind of dispel that either or choice in the US, I think is a key piece. And the second thing is shifting this idea that youth are a risk to youth are talent. And in the US, we really, really struggle with this one. And in Switzerland, it's a huge, tradition of seeing youth as potential. And it's not for charity. They're not investing in youth because they're charity. They're investing in them because they get a return on that investment, because they're talented. And so how do we start earlier in the US? Most of the average age in the US is 29, or in California is 29. In Switzerland, it's 17. How do we prevent disconnection from the labor force before it happens and start earlier? And then third, shifting from a program mindset, like we need an apprenticeship program, to a system mindset. Meaning there is like an entire system out there that an employer doesn't have to be an educator and create their own program from scratch. But that program's there and they just sign up for it. And so that kind of reduces the burden on the employer and makes it cheaper to participate. And then finally, and Orion mentioned this, like employers have to kind of mindset shift to I'm just consuming talent to I'm actually creating it. And that's about growing the pie. So if you look at how many computer science degrees we're creating and how many openings there are, we're importing talent from all over the world, and it's displacing our local residents, and it's creating all this strife when we could be growing this talent locally and reducing displacement and making finding talent here that we are, if each company is building, then even if they leave your company, there's another company making someone else that you might be able to employ. So it's kind of thinking more long term about the pie than just like, who can I beat out for this candidate from Harvard? So I think those are, did I answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. She answered the question? Yeah. So taking it back to, so we went all global, and now let's take it back to California and like to make it actionable. And so with the new governor, there's been new budget that's been coming in. Specifically, is there any budget towards apprenticeships? And if so, how much of it is around the tech apprenticeships that we are working on?
Yeah, so Governor Newsom has already committed to, we have 85,000 apprenticeship slots in California today, and he wants that figure to go to 500,000. So that's a huge commitment. And Vince argues in his report that we cannot do that by just like tweaking what we already have. We have to sort of rethink about it as a system. We have to create that system at a state level. And recently there was legislation passed where the Department of Apprenticeship Standards created a separate, so there is a long history here of trade apprenticeships, as you probably know, in construction, building trades in particular. It's highly revolves around the union system, and it also is not very diverse, especially when it comes to gender. So what they've created is a separate part of the Division of Apprenticeship Standards, and it has a advisory council right now, the Interagency Committee on Apprenticeship, and it's focused on non-traditional apprenticeships. So it's like all the other like tech, advanced manufacturing, healthcare. And so that is the beginning of a state infrastructure for this. There's also been a lot of investment in different apprenticeship or apprenticeship-related things already, especially in the last few years. So one is the federal program that TechSF is funded through, the American Apprenticeship Initiative. Another one is the California Apprenticeship Initiative, which is funding a tech apprenticeship effort in San Luis Obispo through the community college system. And then there are a series of other initiatives, both funded through state, but also Irvine Foundation is has funded the Link Learning Alliance. So there are all these different work-based learning and career pathway investments that have been made, and the report actually details all of them. And the issue, though, is that they're not well aligned into a system. So sometimes, there's so many initiatives that all the same employers are getting approached by each separate initiative, and it's really frustrating for everyone. So the question about the system is, how do you align it all so it's not duplicating? Yeah.
One of the things that's interesting is that with California, especially around policy, if California can get it right, then usually the rest of the nation follows. It's super critical that we do get it right here. And when we start to take a look at some of the demographics of California in general, it's mostly going to be folks of color. And so I think that there's also, we touched upon a little bit of what is the balance between giving opportunities to the local talent that's here versus providing, the visas for international talent to come in. As a proud immigrant, I think it's a balance of both.
Right.
But we should be also making sure that we are giving opportunities to the local talent. Maybe folks who were like me, who immigrated, and I went through the programs to have that opportunity as well. And just to give some stats that you mentioned, there's still a lot of untapped potential, even with some of our current 4-year CS degrees, specifically when we take a look at by demographics. Like California, still we're pumping out more talent with even those degrees, and they are being hired. And so when folks talk about that it's a pipeline issue, it's definitely not. It's really around the hiring process, some of the biases, and even some of the way that I think folks have been used to sourcing talent. And so I hope that this discussion was informative for you all to start to think about how is it that you're diversifying the way you are looking at sourcing your talent. And if you are a talent, this is also an opportunity to be the rules are changing. And maybe we are going to start, with policy changes at the larger scale, because we want to be able to start to do this at a faster rate. Right now, from a perspective of California driving also the U.S. economy, but also when we take it at a global perspective, this is the hub for a lot of those tech companies as well. And so super critical that we get it right. So thank you, Annalise. And to close it off, before we also do Q&A, if you can each just go around and to all the folks that are here, what's your best advice as individuals, as employees, or as representatives of companies, or folks who are working at different organizations trying to create this work? What is the call to action that you have to them of how can they help move this forward as well from their side? Maybe we can start in the back, and then we'll end right here.
All right. So maybe just a quick poll. How many of you are from the tech industry? All of you, almost all of you. And how many of you are on the talent acquisition recruiting side of the business? And how many on the engineering side where you can influence part of it? All right. So it's all around. So I would say for all of you, one call to action would be, if you can think inwardly in your companies or your departments, what can you do differently to open up that opportunity? Is it on your next hire that you make? I don't know how many of you are part of big companies that have a very strict way of doing it. Then you need to really talk to TechSF and figure out how you can do that. But also, just your next hire, how can you think about looking at the funnel differently? Even if you have 4-year degree person, do you and can you invest a bit more time in creating the talent instead of just hiring it?
Lanisha?
I think a really interesting theme that emerged throughout the panel today was, looking at yourself as a company as a producer versus a consumer. It's interesting to me, having walked the lines of both apprenticeship and at one point, having that undergraduate degree almost, that, there's a huge kind of gap in learning, even for our university students, right? They aren't always, producing in real world tool sets. So there's a learning curve there. And if we can take a chance with someone with a degree who also has a huge gap in terms of practical implementation, why can't we also do that for folks with a very non-traditional background? Take time to pause that even if you are someone who is heavily involved in these projects and service, to come with humility, because not only are you teaching someone, but you're learning something from them because their their specific context will fill a lot of blind spots that you didn't even know you had.
Yeah, I would just say that to kind of piggyback on that, I think like in America right now, I think 30% of U.S. high school students go on to get a four-year degree. And so, you know, that 70% of our you know, fellow Americans who are not being considered for a lot of these occupations because of the different proxies we use to kind of gauge talent is really short-sighted. And there's a lot of aptitude out there that we're not finding through our, you know, applicant tracking systems, et cetera. I think there are a lot of different lessons that are better learned on the job in you know, to your point, like that practical application. And I think through apprenticeship, once we get it right systemically, you're going to see, you know, a growing middle class again. You're going to see less of a skills gap. And so if there's any way that the folks on this panel can help you socialize this idea internally at your companies, just reach out, because we want to see this thing grow.
And channeling Vince for a minute here, Swiss, just picture a Swiss older guy. We really want to send delegations to Switzerland, and we need employers to lead that charge to send them. Because when you're out there and you're seeing this in real life, it just kind of opens your creative juices a little bit to think outside the box. And seeing it work well is very inspiring and motivating. And the governor's already expressed a lot of interest, and what we need is people to work, employers that are willing to work with other employers to say, we have a problem in finding the talent we need. These are the things we have in common. There are things that obviously are custom and that happens on the job, but these are things that we all need. And making that pressure to the governor and to, you know, the labor secretary and the economic development offices to really take a lead on this, because I see this as, with the future of work and growing inequality, like if we don't create opportunities for people to get skills on the job, in the job, you know, it's just not looking good for our entire country. And this is so important when, you know, when you think about retail going away and all those paths that are always the ways that people do get into jobs. So especially for our youth, I think this is people need to kind of organize and get together.
And definitely. To close it off, I think that it's definitely an opportunity for this movement to continue to grow. How can we see thousands and hopefully millions of this type of employment really happening? And it's a really new way of learning that I think is super critical, that is inclusive. And as a technologist myself, I think this is a part of that. Without programs like this, the technology that's being created is going to suffer. And so I think if we really want to advance and really use tech with purpose to actually also close gaps of access and needs, you need folks who have lived that journey to be able to help inform from a design perspective, from how it's being actually put out, and what are some of the unintended consequences that some of this technology has. And I think that we have the opportunity, especially being here in this area, the world is really looking at us. And I hope that as a collective, we're able to mobilize, and it's great to have these amazing partners. TechSF is holding SF, TechHire Oakland is going to hold Oakland, and maybe who else is out there? There's folks out in the South Bay, and so we need everybody around to really think of this as not just a city, but a regional, and as a state, and eventually as a country. And so with that said, thank you so much for spending the time. Now we'll check the score, and I'll hand it over to Becca for any type of Q&A.
Oh my God.
7 minutes left in the third.
Great.
Let's do a few questions if folks have them.
Yeah. And sorry, just we'll start with you. I just wanted to also just throw a few resources from the Caper Center to continue the discussion. Our tech leaver study that shows why talent is leaving tech and how it's causing $1 billion plus shortage, as well as also the leaky tech pipeline. So that way you can also see that this is systemic issues. that wherever you're at in your current role, you have a role to play. So just putting that out there. And yes, sir, introduce yourself and your background, like who you're representing, and then your question.
Sure. So my name is Hiran Surdi. I used to work in tech for about 10 years. The last 2 years I've been working in finance, so Sanjana is my friend, like coming as her guest. So my question is, continuing on this theme of being a producer of talent. So I guess it's for Shalin. From the employer side, are there any fundamental differences between sort of how you're identifying in-house talent to be a mentor or a manager for an apprentice versus being a manager for an intern versus a first-year hire? Is there anything that you're doing in-house to better cultivate that talent?
So one of the big differences of just doing rounds up is a lot of people within the company are involved in the hiring process. So it's the same technologists, engineers, and managers that are part of the interview panel, part of the application reviews, and they're already invested. It is so interesting as they interview candidates, their managers are saying, I really like this candidate. Can you please allocate this person to my team? So it's also organic because they're part of the ecosystem. But then just to answer your question, like how do you identify them? Because it's a very open program where we are talking about it all the time at LinkedIn, so people are aware. So when we go around and say who has openings to have that, there will be usually people raising hands, and we always have now a longer list of people raising hands than the apprentices coming in.
You had a question?
Yeah. So my name is Omar Butler. I'm the executive director of a nonprofit that works with students from 9th grade until college completion. And so I appreciate all what you said. I guess my question is there a risk of continued sorting with respect to apprenticeships? And what I mean by that is, given the dynamics and economics of areas like the Bay Area, is there a risk of gearing folks of color in particular into positions that actually don't continue to provide progressive opportunities so that they can actually truly afford to live here, grow families here, and have community, particularly in neighborhoods that are now becoming gentrified and developed?
I'll take that. So this is why I'm very, very intentional about the dual education model, because we need to get away from tracking. We cannot say, you're a person of color, you don't need a degree, just go and work for Google without a degree and then stay in that low-end job. We need to make apprenticeships line up in the system with degrees, so that you get credit for that time, and it's linked into the education system. That's what I mean in part by system, is that you do this time and it counts towards your degree, so that we are not tracking, and that's what I mean by a both and solution. And if you start at the high school level, you can, what they call it in Switzerland is permeability. So you can start in one track, a vocational track, and then you can decide to go the academic route and do, but in Switzerland they have a practical degree and an academic degree as well. So, you know, there's a lot of potential for us to expand, but I think that's why we have to be very intentional that this is not about like a secondary track that is less than.
I can actually provide some context too, because so back in 2014, I did one of my first internships with Intel, and that yielded a very different result, because I think the mindset was more like, hey, we need to make some social impacts, we need to start creating like buzz and community, but there wasn't like a direct pipeline into what sort of actual like job opportunity that correlated to. So going via GitHub, always loved the platform because I think tech overall is becoming more portfolio based. So, you know, when you get on someone's GitHub profile, what language they're using, the complexity of their projects, how much they're contributing to open source community, these are all becoming very transparent things. And I think we're at a very unique opportunity at this point because the inherency is there. You know, people are dropping their degree requirements, and at the same time, you have a portfolio that's kind of getting standardized. I think those can be leveraged to create concrete roles.
I'm gonna look at Becca for time.
We're good.
We're good?
Maybe do like two or three more questions.
All right,
I know
great.
there's a bunch.
All right, so you first.
Okay, thank you. You asked for international time to be at the company, and in our case, it's like 1 or 2 weeks at school, and then 1 or 2 weeks at the company over the year. And it works quite well, actually. So I was wondering, what is the place for the schools in your program? Do you work with schools? Do you need some kind of certification for schools? Because this is the case in France, for example. And who is paying for what?
Sure, I'll take that. Yeah, that's commendable that you've got your program there, and we probably have some lessons to learn from you. Through the grant that I work under, we pay for the educational portion of an apprenticeship, but apprentices are all full-time employees. So the company pays their wages, we pay for their training. If a company says we want them to take courses at a junior college or maybe a college of extended learning or something, we take care of that. It could also be through a boot camp or a nonprofit training provider. That's currently the way it's set up to try to incentivize, model adoption. Those dollars will go away one day, but the idea is that the return on investment companies get, they'll realize that they don't need the little bit of incentive that we offer them anyway. The model pays for itself. So currently, apprentices, full-time employee, we pay for their education.
And the bigger picture answer is that in the report's called Closing the Gap by Vince Kohler, K-O-L-L-E-R. And he has a diagram in that report that shows what a dual education system would look like. And it's basically the same idea that you spend part of your time in the job and part of your time there. And I think we're at the stage now where Orian's going to Switzerland with a couple of other folks in a month, less than a month, 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So this is our delegation this year is going to work on a work plan to implement that vision. And so we have like this high level vision, but we don't quite yet, we're still trying to figure out how to get there, and we would really love input. And that's why I said we should bring more people to Switzerland, because that's how you can get involved in this work. To build this out, and that's definitely part of the vision.
Tough sell. I think in the green, and then you had your hand over here.
Yeah, I actually have an input on what you're doing. What you're doing is great because it's approaching things on a systemic level. But there is something that you're really missing. You're going from the bottom-up model, but there's also the top-down model, which is the key to the structure and the fabric of the state and the country itself. So what I'm getting at is that there are a lot of older workers out there who actually have the skills already. They do not get hired, okay? They've been there, they've done that, they can prevent the companies from going bankrupt based on their experience, but they do not get hired, okay? And that's what your program in TechEquity is missing. It gears towards the 18 to 24-year-old, but then there is a large market of people who are out there already and who cannot find jobs. And I know project managers out there who has over 15 years experience. They had a heck of a tough time getting jobs. And it's not because they didn't have the experience. It's not because they didn't have the degrees. They have their 4-year degrees. They have their PhDs. They are not getting hired, okay?
Yeah.
These people are not getting hired, and they're the fabric of the society. They're the ones who take care of the millennials who take advantage of them because they're their parents and they have a free home to stay. But when they run out of money in taking care of their kids or their relatives who become sick, there's nothing else to fall upon, and it becomes a house of cards, and things are going to collapse. When things collapse, it's not just the top collapsing, it's the bottom collapsing at the same time. So that's what's missing in your statewide approach, is that there are a lot of people, the resources are there, they're not being hired. That's the problem.
And if I can add to that, I think one of those things is a really great point of the bias that exists. So let's be real, there's ageism in the Bay Area, no doubt about it. What's interesting is that we should actually be asking those questions to some of the companies that are doing some of this hiring. And what are their processes? How are they outreaching? And how are they actually creating some of these trends? I'm always curious, I think to the last question, it was also interesting. Like there's a big company that put about $5 million in Oakland, OUSD. And I was always curious, like what if they were to that money towards 18 plus talent, right? And it could be a wide range. Because the employer, the talent is there, they need folks to be working, as opposed to having more events that are about awareness. What if they actually invested some of that money in teacher development that can actually start to teach some of these classes at different scale, and maybe to a broader community as well, right? So I think it's not necessarily a one program specifically or one city. It's really a systemic issue. When we take a look at who's controlling some of the decision side, is really how can we help some of these companies take a look at changing their systems. And we really need more companies like the LinkedIns, the GitHubs, and some of these other partners to start. And it is really hard when you actually, and I'll share a little bit of some examples. It is really hard for some of the employees because a lot of these programs are sometimes very ground up, because it's a lot of the culture. It's like, let's test something, let's try it and see if it works, and then we'll scale it, right? That's type of the culture. But it's also a lot of burden on a lot of those employees. And a lot of times it's a lot of pressure. And so the question is a great question, and I think it's a really systemic question that we should be asking at all sides. And I think in general, right, is also the bias of age, socioeconomic status. This one specifically is a little bit more focused towards the education pedigree. What does that mean? But also where are they coming from their own lived journey. So I think let's keep asking these questions. And I think that that's what hopefully today was about, to make sure that we are continually doing that. And as a millennial, I'm contributing to the society. Supporting my mama. So I think that there's also, and this is a plug for millennials and Gen Z, what makes me really optimistic in all of this work, and I really commend everybody here, all of us, for really spending the time to think about it more critically. It's really also that there's a new generation that is asking the why not, and the why, more than some of us have been able, or we really even had a choice. And so I think that that's really something that we should be also making sure that we're uplifting in a new way, and challenging these models that we have, and to be honest, breaking some of these models and creating new ones. But it takes time, right? And so what is the end until we get to that point?
Yeah, and I think, don't quote me, that Stripe started a program for women returning to work after taking time off to have children. So not a full answer to that question by any means, but I think companies, as we ask those questions, if we all ask more of those questions, more companies will start to listen and start to think about different ways that they can adapt their hiring structures from the beginning of the pipeline all the way through the people who have the most experience. Sir in the green shirt, you had your hand up, and this will be our last one for now.
Make it good, no pressure.
I understand like there's this kind of idea of coming, like integration with the educational system, but it sounds like what we're doing right now, maybe with the LinkedIn example, is a little bit divorced from that. How is what I'm hearing is, how is it different from kind of what we do with like traditional internship program or contract to hire? Like it sounds like definitely the intake is different and the sourcing, but how is it different like on the ground and the experience of people being there and working together? How's that different from kind of how you approach like a normal internship or a normal sort of just contract to hire, like 6 months?
So I can talk at LinkedIn the way we approach the apprenticeship. Contract to hire, you expect somebody to be up and running as they get in the program. Internship, there's a certain level of expectation that they're bringing in the door because they've gone through a full-year degree or 3 years or whatever. As an apprentice, the guidance is, or the onus is more on the mentorship and coaching to say, can I give you smaller tasks, whether it is bug fixing or smaller coding tasks, so that I can help you grow and learn on the job. So the approach and the output of it is not as high pressure. It's like you don't work on time critical, business critical projects as you come in the door. As a contractor, you are brought in because there's a fire and you need to come and put it out. And as an apprentice, that's not the expectation. So expectation is different. The mentorship element of it is strongly there, like that is part of the program. And again, the coaching from the manager and the people around you is there as well.
I would also add that in Switzerland, for example, an apprenticeship lasts at a minimum of 2 years and a maximum of 4. And as the employer, it's actually in the employer's interest for it to be longer. Does anyone know why?
They can pay them less.
The apprentice wage is lower. So the ROI is higher But as the apprentice, what that does is it gives you a long runway to really learn, and it gives you that very supportive structure along the way. And so in Switzerland, they really encourage these to be longer because you want those relationships to be strong. And people they spend the first year just learning their job like anyone else, right? And then it's really in the next few years that they really start to blossom and bloom. And that's where you get this long-term relationship that also tends to lead to more retention, both in the retention of the apprentice and actually the retention of the mentor, because mentors have reported, a sense of feeling, like their job is rewarding because they're helping people.
I think one thing that I would love to see more of these apprenticeships and in general ask more questions about this contractor, because tech's dirty secret is that the majority of the staff are actually contractors. When we take a look at benefits and wages and all that, that is suppressed. So there's a lot of issues on that we should start. That should be another panel. If you just take a look at Google's workforce, 50%. Right? Google's workforce is about 50% or so contractor, and you're like, huh? So we should actually be asking those questions, because there's a lot of, even as taxpayers and individuals, there's a lot of money that's not getting circulated back and invested back. So actually, I would be curious to see what's the next evolution for some of these apprenticeships to really change and not just be another contractor, another way to be a contractor, but actually into full employment, into better wages, but also career paths. And I wanted to end on that point, that I think one of the opportunities here is we want to make sure that this isn't just let's get folks for this specific time and piece, but it's really going back to the heart of all of this, which is people, us. How is this talent actually having more opportunities to create things that matter, see themselves as creating talent, and leveraging technology as a tool, not necessarily as tech driving us individually. And so I think that there's an opportunity to really rethink some of the benefits that are being provided, what's our role as well in our local communities and some of our education systems, as well as publicly. And so I think the policy and all of this stuff, which is one of the reasons we're excited to collaborate with TechEquity, is because there's a lot of discussions, but there's also a lot of opportunities to make legit actions. And so we'll end with that, and I hope you're all, if you have additional questions, feel free to reach out to us. Feel free to share our contact information so we can continue to have this dialogue, because we're just right at the beginning. And so
tip of the iceberg.
Yes, thank you.
Nice to meet you.
Sport, words are up by 2.
Nice to meet you.
Oh, yay!
Wait, what is it? What?
Up by 3.
Up by 3.
Oh, wonderful. Left for third.
Okay. Hey, thank you so much. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, no, you.
You did great. You like to my voice?
No, sorry. I promise I wasn't like doing it.
It's good.
Yeah.
I didn't have time to go.
No, the game. I was supposed to go all the way.
Thank you for coming. That kind of program. I was actually one of those really well. So my batch actually was half like older folks and then half like younger folks. So there was actually a lot of mothers who were returning students.
I have a card. Yeah, of course, please. And like I said, everything we do, it's all free. It's all paid for by the Department of Labor. So I know you both are hiring managers, right? I saw you both raising hands.
Yeah. No, the main thing that I wanted to follow up on is how do we identify? So if I raise my hand, I'm ready. How can I get a stream of candidates that we can interview and start?
So of the 14 different training providers that we fund, we've got our own pipeline, right? That we've been placing into jobs, and so we can present them to you for apprenticeship opportunities. Ultimately, we want you to hire whoever is the best fit for your company. So if it's not one of our candidates, you're free to put an ad on Indeed or search LinkedIn or whatever, and vet people until you're really confident in them, and then you hire whoever you want. We're investing in these people's training, so we want to present them first, but you hire whoever you want.
Yep.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
And that's across the board
going
in
for
terms
that
of
reason.
specifically technology roles, but what's the scope of?
It's like information technology, so everything from like networking and hardware to like cybersecurity and kind of programming. But we do have like creative roles, marketing, training, business like Salesforce, business analyst, and admin. There's a big scope. Depending on the roles that you're having a hard time like sourcing, we can talk to you about creating a program for you. Which company are you guys with?
We work for startups.
Okay, cool. Like consulting.
No.
And you guys, you both
venture
work with.
studio.
Oh, okay, cool. But I mean, yeah.
So we are part of a venture studio. So we have a portfolio of companies that are part of our venture studio. We are startups.
Yeah.
And
So young companies that